members of the Nickel Kelly family will be lighting our flaming chalice this morning as we begin.
Does everyone have a bulletin? Turn to the top of the bulletin. The prelude. It's a sing-along.
I'm going to sing a couple of verses, but we'll cue you when it's your turn. Good. Up to mighty London went an Irishman one day. As the streets were paved with gold, sure everyone was gay, singing songs of Piccadilly, Strand, and Leicester Square, till Paddy got excited and he shouted to them there, "It's a long way to Tipperary, it's a long way to go, it's a long way to Tipperary, to the sweetest girl I know. Goodbye, Piccadilly, farewell, Leicester Square. It's a long, long way to Tipperary, but my heart's right there." I've been a soldier just a while, and I would like to state, the life is simply wonderful, the army food is great. I sleep with 97 others in a wooden hut. I love them all, they all love me, it's very lovely, but oh, how I hate to get up in the morning. Oh, how I'd love to remain in bed, for the hardest blow of all is to hear the buglers call. You gotta get up, you gotta get up, you gotta get up this morning. Someday I'm going to murder the bugler. Someday we're going to find him dead. I'll amputate his reveille and step upon it heavily and spend the rest of my life in bed. And then I'll get that other pup, the guy that wakes the bugler up, and spend the rest of my life in bed. Over there, send the word over there, that the Yanks are coming, the Yanks are coming, the drums rum-tumming everywhere. So prepare, say a prayer, send the word to beware. We'll be over, we're coming over, and we won't come back till it's over there.
Remember. Remember. It's such an easy word, and yet sometimes so easy to forget. This morning, we are here to remember. At 5 a.m. 100 years ago today, the armistice was signed in a railroad car in France, bringing 4 years of bitter fighting in Europe and elsewhere to an end. The war would end on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. Bells rang out. We will do that again this morning. Sometimes it's called World War I. Sometimes the Great War, but unfortunately, also known as the War to End All Wars, and more recently, the Forgotten War. And frankly, there's so much more to remember since then. So many shootings, the ongoing conflict in Afghanistan, the horrible events of 9/11, the First and Second Gulf Wars, the Vietnam War, the Korean War, and of course, World War II, which also in its own way has to be acknowledged this morning. Some days it can be overwhelming to think about all of it. Look on your bulletin cover. In front of First Parish out on the Common, there's a rock, it's a boulder. And there's a list of soldiers from Bedford who served in World War I. Inside your bulletin, if you look on the insert in the back, there's a list of those with family members who served during World War I who were part of this congregation. Still, let's go back 100 years and remember many facets of that war. Let us honor not only those who lost their lives, but those who came back. The hymns being sung in this morning's service were the top 3 hymns being sung at that time. We've already sung some of the hits of the day, with more songs to come. And the poetry, it tells it like it was and gives a window to the many mixed emotions of the day and afterwards. Let's start with a poem. British poet and Cambridge University professor of Latin, A.E. Housman, wrote The Lads and Their Hundreds in 1896 as part of his larger collection, A Shropshire Lad. The original collection was slow to catch on with the public, but in the midst of World War I, some of the poems were set to music. The combination of the musical settings and the seemingly relevant text to the issues of the war helped to ensure their popularity throughout World War I to this day. The lads and their hundreds to Ludlow come in for the fair. There's men from the barn and the forge and the mill and the fold. The lads for the girls and the lads for the liquor are there, and there with the rest are the lads that will never be old. There's chaps from the town and the field and the till and the cart. And many to count are the stalwart, and many the brave, and many the handsome of face and the handsome of heart, and few that will carry their looks or their truth to the grave. I wish one could know them. I wish there were tokens to tell the fortunate fellows that now you can never discern. And then one could talk with them friendly and wish them farewell and watch them depart on the way that they will not return. And now you may stare as you like and there's nothing to scan, and brushing your elbow unguessed at and not to be told. They carry back bright to the coiner the mintage of man, the lads that will die in their glory and never be old. Let's stand as we are able to sing the first hymn, which is page 281, O God, our help in ages past.
and we join in the words of our unison affirmation. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. El amor es el espíritu de esta iglesia, y el servicio es su ley. Este es nuestro gran pacto, vivir juntos en paz, buscar la verdad en el amor y ayudarnos los unos a los otros. So be it. Good morning. Good morning, buenos dias. My name is John Gibbons, and with Annie Gonzalez Milliken, we are parish ministers here. It used to be that I would preach in this room with some frequency, but these days I give the welcome and announcements regularly. I'll make up for that someday. Welcome to this Veterans Day commemoration of the end of the First World War, the 11th hour of the 11th month on the 11th day. But you know, they actually agreed to end the war at 5 a.m. And between 5 a.m. and 11 a.m., the killing continued, pretty much for the hell of it. And there were 3,500 casualties in those morning hours before the armistice was signed. My father was born in 1910 and remembered seeing the parade of soldiers as they left for war from his hometown of Aurora, Illinois. And even when we visit our friends in Transylvania, the imprint of that war and its conclusion is felt. Hungary lost 2/3 of its land area in the aftermath of the First World War, so that millions of people went to bed thinking that they lived in Hungary, and they awakened the next morning knowing that they lived in Romania. The scars of that war are felt all across Europe and the world. There will be town ceremonies today for Veterans Day at Veterans Park at noon. And also at noon here, our Peace and Justice Committee is hosting a showing of the remarkable film Dark Money. Tuesday, you may know, is town meeting. And there are a number of important reasons to be present for town meeting. Some of us have been sponsors of a petitioner's article that would amend the general bylaws of the town to explicitly allow solar panels within the historic district. That will be considered right away at the beginning of the meeting. It is the second article. And so if you would like to participate, please be present at 7:30. And I have said this before, but should that article be passed and we prevail, I would encourage us not to cheer or applaud, but perhaps more appropriately to let out a big sigh of relief. I hope to see many of you there, and if you are non-residents, you are welcome to attend and observe and introduce yourself to our town clerk upon entering the high school, and you will be escorted to a special section at the front of the high school auditorium. Finally, next Sunday, amidst our multi-generational holiday observance, we also will welcome new members, those who have signed our ancient and honorable membership book since the last time we had a new member Sunday. And there are invitations in the mail to newcomers to consider signing that book, and the book is available after church today and throughout the week. All you need to do is speak with me or with Annie, and we'd like some new members. We're sort of tired of the old blood, and it's time to mix it up a little bit, and maybe you can help out. Welcome, whether you're here for the first time, welcome if you've been here forever. Please stay in touch by filling out one of the blue cards if you have not been here before, and it is good to be together. We know that you have a choice of things to do on Sunday morning, and we are glad you have made the choice to be here together with us. Brad Connor, back to you.
Flowers. We all think of flowers as being something that makes us very happy. We give them to those we love. We give them in remembrance of someone that has passed and that we loved. In the case of the Unitarians, we have flower communion, because in 1923, Norbert Čapek decided that flowers were something that could unify the diversity in his congregation. So flowers mean a lot to all of us, that first flower of spring. And so this next story is about a flower. And in this case, it's about this kind of a flower. You know what it is, right? It's a poppy. This particular poppy at one point came down the walls of the Tower of London because 4 years ago they did a commemorative event at the Tower of London where they had a poppy placed along the wall and down through the moat for every single person who had died in World War I. It was an immense sea of red. The royal family walked through and touched a lot of them. It was very meaningful for the British people. It was very meaningful for everyone. But what's significant about a poppy? In April 1915, so that's 103 years ago, there was a battle, and it was a huge battle. It was the first time that chemical warfare had ever been used. And it was used first by the Germans and then by our side, but in April of 1915, it was the Germans. And they blew the gas across the field, and they were trying to hit the British. And then the wind changed, and it came back and hit them as well. And they were unprepared. And so what happened was that a lot of people died that day. And there were so many that they laid in the fields, and they didn't know what to do. And the next morning, they woke up, and they went out and looked over the fields, and it was a sea of red poppies. And so this little flower, this delicate little flower, although this one's not so delicate, this little delicate flower, not only is the color significant, but it also, for them and for us, and especially as Unitarians with our flower communion, remember that this flower is for the vets of those who served and died, those who served and came back alive, and also all those other emotions we associate with flowers: love, justice, and unity. And so I've got some helpers here, and they're going to come up, and everyone here is going to be given a red poppy. And as they do that, remember those people who fought for us, who still continue to fight for us, and hold it, cherish it, and give it away to someone if you want to tell them the story. So here we go, guys. And just start giving them out. Yeah. Yeah.
Kids can continue to distribute the poppies. And just by the way, if you haven't gone through Carlisle Center, take note there, because there are crocheted poppies on all the public lands in the center around the Carlisle Rotary. It's a quite remarkable display of hundreds, if not thousands, of poppies. And kids may continue to distribute things, but when they are finished, they can go off to their classes with teachers, and we will sing Amazing Grace. It is number 205.
John McCrae was a Canadian. He was at the Second Battle of Ypres, which was the battle that I just spoke of during the Time for All Ages. And this was his memory of that battle and what happened afterwards.
In Flanders Field is a very well-known poem. When I mentioned that I was reading it in church to my housemate, she began reciting it from memory from her school days. And it is a meaningful poem, so much more so when we've heard the context, as we heard so beautifully from Brad. One of the other pieces in the background about it mentioned that many believe John McCrae was writing in grief at the death of a specific friend, and that it was Alexis Helmer who inspired this particular poem. And maybe you can hear that grief in the poem, that love for a friend, and that trying to make meaning from this tragedy, such impossible violence. How do you make meaning from that? We are urged to carry a torch and raise it high, to take up a quarrel with the foe, and I urge us to remember always that the foe is not other human beings, but war and violence itself. In Flanders Fields. In Flanders Fields, the poppies blow, between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky, the larks, still bravely singing, fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago, we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Fields.
After a few months of active duty, American poet Joyce Kilmer rose to the rank of sergeant in the 42nd Rainbow Division. He was deployed to Europe in November 1918. By April 1918, was working in the military intelligence. He wrote to his wife, "Now I'm doing the work I love, and work you may be proud of. None of the drudgery of soldiering, but a double share of glory and thrills." While leading a scouting party across no man's land during the Second Battle of the Marne, a sniper's bullet killed him on July 30th, 1918, at the age of 31 years old. Today, almost solely remembered for his poem, Trees. Early in 1918, Kilmer wrote a moving tribute to his French comrades in the poem, Prayer of a Soldier in France. My shoulders ache beneath my pack, lie easier, cross upon his back. I march with feet that burn and smart, tread holy feet upon my heart. Men shout at me who may not speak, they scourge thy back and smote thy cheek. I may not lift a hand to clear my eyes of salty drops that sear. Then shall my fickle soul forget thy agony of bloody sweat. My rifle hand is stiff and numb. From thy pierced palm red rivers come. Lord, thou didst suffer more than me, than all the host and land of sea. So let me render back again this millionth of thy gift. Amen.
We have a new way of sharing our offering plate on a monthly basis. Our Social Responsibility Council makes a decision about the groups that we will share the plate with. Last Sunday there was a special offering honoring Jerry Rabinowitz, one of those killed at the Tree of Life in Pittsburgh. This Sunday is the recipient chosen by the Social Responsibility Council, and it is an organization called Dignity in Asylum. And much as the First World War was globally disruptive, we live in a very disrupted time with immigration and refugees globally. And to speak a bit about that organization, we've asked Andrea Hewitt to come and tell us a little bit.
Thank you so much for sharing the plate with us today. My friend and I, we founded Dignity in Asylum 4 years ago to offer safe and welcoming housing to people fleeing persecution in their home countries and escaping to seek protection in this country, in the United States. We offer free housing to people seeking asylum in the United States. Maybe you know that when asylum seekers come here, there is no support network in place for them. When refugees come, they come with all their paperwork intact. They can start working right away, and they can get support from resettlement agencies. Asylum seekers are in a different situation. When they come, they cannot get any government-funded support. So if they arrive here and they don't have friends or family members, they often end up in really abusive, dangerous housing situations or in homeless shelters. Some of the guests we've housed used to sleep in staircases, in cars, even in the cold winter, or in empty storefronts just to avoid going to a homeless shelter. So we founded Dignity Asylum 4 years ago. We rented one apartment in Maynard, where we could offer housing to 3 women. And since then we have grown. We are currently renting 4 different places in local communities, in Acton, in West Concord, in Maynard, and in Revere, and we're housing 10 people. So our guests receive free housing, food, and community support through our volunteers from us until they are either granted asylum or until they receive their work authorization. It currently takes a long time to even be heard for asylum. Many of our guests have transitioned out because they got their work authorization. It usually takes a good year to get that, but only 2 of the 30 people we've housed have had an asylum hearing, and we're very happy that they all were granted asylum. Our organization is run by volunteers. Nobody is paid, so all the donations go directly towards paying rent and buying food and covering all the costs we need to cover to house our wonderful guests. So thank you so much for sharing your offerings with us today. Your gift will make a real difference, and it also sends a strong message of welcome in a time where most of our guests are really scared by the current political climate. Thank you.
I see with us this morning our friends from Iraq and from Syria and from Central America. These issues are not distant. They are present. They are in one another's eyes. Freely we have received, freely give. For the good work of this congregation, our offering will gratefully be received.
A Soldier, a poem, was written in 1918 by American poet Florence Earle Coates. Coates, the granddaughter of a noted abolitionist, broke ground for women's rights at a time when publishing was a man's profession. Supported by many professional colleagues, Coates wrote numerous poems and in 1915 was appointed Poet Laureate in Pennsylvania, the first woman to hold that post. Much of her writing is patriotic and war-related, describing the selfless sacrifices made by soldiers and civilians alike for the cause of freedom and liberty, but not shunning harsh realities. A Soldier, while patriotic, does not take up the cause of the war. Many disagreed with her perspective, equating patriotism and the war. As time progressed, Coates' writing reflected an ever harsher view of the realities and lasting effects of the battlefield. A Soldier. Dear God, I raised my boy to be a soldier. I tried to make him strong of will and true. I told him many a tale of deeds heroic, the noblest and sweetest tales I knew. In thought, he shared the charge at Balaclava. With the Swiss Guard, o'ermastered coward death. With Gordon, all renounced. With Scott and Perry, breathed in his ardent youth heroic breath. A little lad, he wept for wounded Sydney, for Bayard sans reproche, who knew no fears, yet hurt himself if one but said, "My soldier." Straightway he smiled and swallowed down his tears. I taught him that the brave are full of mercy, that gentleness and love to strength belong, that honor is the only high adventure, and goodness the one everlasting song. And so I raised my boy to be a soldier, a patriot soldier, brave, devoted, free. And now, with grateful trust, O Father, I give him to my country and to thee.
To the war have gone, who may never return again. 10 million mothers' hearts must break for the ones who died in vain. Heads were turned in sorrow in her lonely years. I heard a mother murmur through her tears, raised my boy to be a soldier. I brought him up to be my pride and joy. Who dares to place a musket on his shoulder to shoot some other mother's darling boy? Let nations arbitrate the future troubles. It's time to lay the sword and gun away. There'd be no war today if mothers all would say, I didn't raise my boy to be a soldier. What victory can chill a mother's heart when she looks at her blighted home? What victory can bring her back all she cared to call her own? Let each mother answer in the years to be, remember that my boy belongs to me. I didn't raise my boy to be a soldier. I brought him up to be my pride and joy. Who dares to place a musket on his shoulder to shoot some other mother's darling boy. Let nations arbitrate the future troubles. It's time to lay the sword and gun away. There'd be no war today if mothers all would say, I didn't raise my boy to be a soldier. There'd be no war today if mothers all would say, I didn't raise my boy to be a soldier.
Siegfried Sassoon wrote The Distant Song in 1916. Born into a wealthy Jewish family, Sassoon served with the Royal Welsh Fusiliers, seeing action in France in the late 1915. He received a military cross for bringing back a wounded soldier during heavy fire. After being wounded in action, Sassoon wrote an open letter of protest to the War Department, refusing to fight anymore. I believe that this war is being deliberately prolonged by those who have the power to end it, he wrote in the letter. At the urging of political activist Bertrand Russell, the letter was read in the House of Commons. Sassoon expected to be court-martialed for his protest, but poet Robert Graves intervened on his behalf, arguing that Sassoon was suffering from shell shock and needed medical treatment. The Distant Song. He stood in the gray trench and longed for home, chilled with the dreary morning and the rain. He shivered, wondering if they'd soon stand down, for he'd been getting wire out half the night and carling round the craters on patrol. There seemed no sort of comfort left in life. One a stupid green or food and sleep, an angry grudge against the filth and noise. Stamping his feet, he knew he ought to go and joke with huddling men about the Boches, hoping our big trench mortars gave them hell. He listened to the tinkling drops of rain on his steel helmet. Then he thought of roofs and soldiers snug in billets, warm and clean. Down by the splintered trees of hidden wood, beyond the German line, a blackbird sang. And suddenly, he was aware of spring. So he stood staring from his ghastly ditch, while paradise was in the distant song.
Shadows creep, and the world is asleep. In the still of the night, baby sleeps down a flight. First she looks all around without making a sound. Then baby toddles up to the telephone and whispers in a baby tone, "Hello, Central, give me no man's land. My daddy's there. My mama told me. She tiptoed off to bed after my prayers were said. Don't ring when you get my number, or you'll disturb Mama's slumber. I'm afraid to stand here at the phone, for I'm alone. So won't you hurry? I want to know why Mama starts to weep when I say now I lay me down to sleep. Hello, Central, give me no man's land. Through the curtains of night comes a beautiful sight, and the sunshine that beams finds a baby in dreams. Mama looks in to see how her darling can be. She finds her baby still in her slumber deep, a whispering while she's fast asleep. Hello, Central, give me no man's land. My daddy's there, my mama told me. She tiptoed off to bed after my prayers were said. Don't ring when you get my number, or you'll disturb Mama's slumber. I'm afraid to stand here at the phone, for I'm alone. So won't you hurry? I want to know why Mama starts to weep when I say now I lay me down to sleep. Hello, Central, give me no man's land. I want to know why Mama starts to weep when I say now I lay me down to sleep. Hello, Central, give me no man's land. Should be ringing the bell.
Good morning, all. I want to thank Brad for inviting me to do a poem. He doesn't know this, but some 20, 25 years ago, a friend who many of you know, our own poet, and I put together a service of poetry, and until the time we got together, I thought I was an educated man. But then we began reading the poetry of this clutch of poets who came out of World War I. Anti-war, anti-autocracy, anti-fascists, all of them. The poem that I'm going to read is called The Parable of the Old Man and the Young. It was written by Wilfred Owen, one of this group. He was born on the Welsh border and a sharp intellect himself and highly sensitive to the unfolding events that were going on around him. He taught for a while in France. In September 1915, nearly a year after the United Kingdom and Germany had started fighting in a war, Owen returned to England. He wasn't sure whether he should enlist or not. But by October, he had enlisted and was at first in a group called the Artists' Rifles, a group of folks who had like interests and like professions, who ultimately became a special forces group. Imagine that, from the Artists' Rifles. In June 1916, he received a commission as a lieutenant in the Manchester Fusilier Regiment, and on December, he left for France with the Lancaster Fusiliers. After many injuries, including several severe concussions, he was committed to the same poet, as chance would have it, as Siegfried Sassoon. They made a strong intellectual connection. Sassoon encouraged Owen's passion to write and to write more poetry. Both were strong advocates for the end of the war, and together wrote some of the most poignant poems chronicling the plight of the soldiers. I'm sorry Sarah Getty isn't with us today, but this would resonate with her. Pick the authority figure of your choice. Pick the biblical reference of your choice from this. So Abram arose, and he clave the wood, and he went, and he took the fire with him and a knife. And they sojourned, both of them together. Isaac, the firstborn, spake, and he said, My father, I behold thy preparations, the fire and the iron, but where is the lamb for this burnt offering? And Abram bound the youth with belts and straps and builded parapets and trenches there, and stretched forth the knife to slay his son. And lo, an angel came down from heaven, saying, Lay not thy hand upon this lad, neither do anything to him. Behold, a ram caught in the thicket by its thorns. Offer the ram of pride instead of him. But the old man would not do so. But slew his son and half the seed of Europe, one by one.
Our last reading is a poem, The Great War, written in 1962 by Vernon Scannell, a British poet, author, and boxer. During the Second World War, he served at El Alamein, and in the aftermath of battle, he watched as his comrades looted the dead bodies of friend and foe alike, and Vernon Scannell deserted. After a term in prison, he was subsequently released to take part in the D-Day landings at Normandy, where he was wounded. In much the way that the First World War haunts the present, Vernon Scannell was haunted by the war as he served it in the Second World War, and in 1962 when he wrote this poem, and we may say that the First World War haunts us still. The Great War. Whenever war is spoken of, I find the war that was called great invades the mind. The gray militia marches over land, a darker mood of gray where fractured tree trunks stand and shells exploding open sudden fans of smoke and earth. Blind murders scythe the deathscape where the iron brambles writhe. The sky at night is honored with rosettes of fire, flares that define the corpses on the wire as terror ticks on wrists at 0 hour. These things I see, but they are only part of what it is that slyly probes the heart. Less vivid images and words excite the sensuous memory, and even as I write, fear and a kind of love collaborate to call each simple conscript up for quick inspection. Trenches, parapets, paunchy with sandbags, bandoliers, tin hats, candles in dugouts, duck boards, mud, and rats. Then, like patrols, tunes creep into the mind, a long, long trail, the rows of no man's land, home fires, and Tipperary. And through the misty keening of a band of Scottish pipes, the proper names are heard like fateful commentary of distant guns. Passchendaele, Bapaume, and Luce, and Mons. And now, whenever the November sky quivers with a bugle's hoarse, sweet cry, the reason darkens. In its evening gleam, crosses and flares, tormented wire, gray earth, splattered with crimson flowers. And I remember, not the war I fought in, but the one called Great, which ended in a sepia November, 4 years before my birth. Abide with me is our hymn. It is number 101.
Oxford Dictionary's definition of the word hindsight is understanding of a situation or event only after it has happened or developed. In order to have hindsight, we have to remember. Never forget. I repeat, never forget. We have to remember that the total number of military and civilian casualties in World War I was about 40 million. What we don't clearly remember is which side wanted war more. Both sides have to take responsibility for starting something they had no idea would lead to 4 years of suffering and sorrow. It was a war that drew a heavy line between the old ways and the new ones. The players on that stage not only fought out the scenes, but they also unintentionally pulled down the entire theater. It was the first war that used modern warfare. The days of organized fighting were replaced by trenches and barbed wire and deadly gases and improved weaponry and tanks and war in the skies. The world would never be the same. And the biggest fact to remember is that decisions were made which would cause the feelings of populations to smolder, which 20 years later would erupt into an even bigger conflagration. We know that now. But they didn't know that then. Most people at that time thought that November 11th, 1918 would bring to a close the war to end all wars. Yes, there was still a lot to be done, but on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918, there was hope. For the most part, those mothers and fathers, our grandparents, great-grandparents, were only thinking about the boys coming home. For many, their emotions were straightforward and simple. All they wanted was for them to be home. They wanted their daughters home from the hospitals in the battlefields of France. There was joy in that moment. Maybe only that moment, but it was definitely joy. Have you ever felt the joy of hugging someone who has been away for a long time? Multiply that feeling by 20, and maybe you'll know what I'm talking about for those folks in 1918. Of course, there was something that no one anticipated. The world was getting smaller. The soldiers and nurses had been to Europe, to France. They'd been to Paris. That was an eye-opening in ways that no one anticipated back then. As a kid who went to Paris as a teenager and then returned to West Virginia only to say, that's it, I don't think I'm going to be able to stay here anymore, I somewhat know the feeling those soldiers were feeling. And so, while we've acknowledged so many aspects of World War I this morning, I now have one more to introduce: the joy and laughter of the children coming home. Let's not forget that. This is not a moment to be flip about something so serious. This is a moment to remember it all. Remember every emotion. Remember all of it. Remember that the war was finally over, and there were bells ringing, and there was dancing in the streets.
Brad, we're going to get new ones. We need the lights, too.
Where's the other mic?
I don't know.
Do it without a mic.
Okay.
Do it without a mic. One side. No, one side. Yeah. One side. This without a mic.